Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Hope you're doing well. And Pete Carroll said something yesterday that kind of caught my attention. And I want to talk about it a little bit here because what he said about this particular player and in turn a few other particular players, I find to be informative for the kind of season that we're having. And also, I think it requires us to ask the question, what should the Seahawks do with certain guys on their roster over the next few weeks? So, Sidney Jones has not played a snap in 2 games now. He's played 12 snaps this year. He is basically an afterthought on this team. He is recovering from a concussion, but regardless, it seems like Sidney Jones has become a relatively irrelevant player on the 2022 Seahawks. And while we're here, let's also mention the fact that Artie Burns has yet to play. Now, Artie Burns is recovering from his own injury, but as of right now, those two guys who a lot of people probably thought were going to be our starting corners going into the season, including myself, I at least thought Sidney Jones was going to be one of the starters. They're basically not playing. They are sitting on the bench waiting for their opportunity. They are watching very young and inexperienced players move ahead of them and stay on the field despite mixed bags of results. And Pete Carroll was asked about Sidney Jones in particular, but he also kind of went into the general strategy here at cornerback. And I want to talk about this because this is interesting. He said the Seahawks want to keep the rhythm of their new younger starters, Michael Jackson and Tariq Woolen. And he said those guys are just doing well. So he didn't bring up the injuries. He didn't talk about Sidney Jones being hurt from the concussion still or Artie Burns recovering from, I can't remember exactly what it was that he had, but he also had some sort of ailment that kept him out of the preseason, except for the last game where he honestly didn't look good. He didn't talk about the injuries. He talked about, well, we like what we have with Michael Jackson and Tariq Woolen. Michael Jackson being a guy who played very little football before this season, and Tariq Woolen being a super raw fifth-round rookie. So it's not the injuries. These guys are not going to get their jobs back necessarily when they get 100%. They might already be 100% and they're still not getting their jobs. So basically, this is going to be the way that it is for the foreseeable future. Now, first, let me just say, I really like this. I think this is great. I think this is awesome. This is absolutely the year to play your young guys. This is absolutely the young year to live with the fact that they're going to make a lot of mistakes. This is the year to live with the fact that they might be bad. If they're bad, okay, find out now, get rid of them, and bring in somebody better next year. Or hope that being bad this year allows them to be good next year, the year after, etc., particularly with Woolen. And the strategy in general is working okay. I wouldn't say our starting outside cornerbacks are the main problem with this defense. Maybe Michael Jackson in the last game was noticeably really bad. There have been penalties. They haven't played amazing, of course, but it's not been a mess. It's had some upshots. There have been some downsides, but it's not working terribly. So I think this is a really good idea. I really liked hearing it. But the interesting thing about this is that it it's very likely that in the short term it is costing you something, right? Like Tariq Woolen, through 3 games, playing okay. PFF grade overall, little below 55. He's okay. He's had some really bad moments like the penalties against Denver, but he's doing a pretty good job preventing completions. And overall, you would say that he has added value to this team. He's allowed 6 receptions in 3 games. He's allowed 50% completion against. These are impressive benchmarks for a rookie corner that was supposed to be very raw. But overall, it's still mixed. The penalties are a problem. The run defense has not been great. It's he is what he is. And Michael Jackson has also been pretty I mean, I don't want to kill him for one game, but that Atlanta game was really bad. And he was doing fairly well before then. He picked up a few penalties against the Niners, but I thought he played pretty well against the Broncos. He's been a really good tackler. He's done he's done some things that definitely deserve some credit. He's allowed 5 completions on 11 targets, which is very solid for an outside corner. But overall, he is just playing okay. Here's the thing. Very good chance that right now, Sidney Jones and Artie Burns would be better than these two. Sidney Jones last year, when he played most of the season, had a PFF grade of 70.2. And by the way, he started terribly, so that grade was dragged down by the first couple games. And Artie Burns last year, granted with another team, I believe the Bears, had a PFF grade of almost 80. So you are losing something by not playing these guys. And that's the thing that I find so interesting about this. That's the thing that I like. We're willing to live with mistakes and bad play now in the hopes that this pays off later. Because, look, Sidney Jones, unlikely to be a Seahawk next year. He's on a 1-year deal. And if he goes through this whole year and barely plays, he's not going to want to come back. I'm sure he wants to play. He's trying to get that big contract, which was denied him probably because of the Achilles injury he had at his, I think, pro day. Artie Burns is on a 1-year deal too, and if he comes here, never plays, probably not going to come back. Even if they were playing, they probably wouldn't be back. They're looking to get paid, and the Seahawks, unless you're Richard Sherman, unless you're super hyper elite, they probably aren't interested in paying you if you're playing the cornerback position because they feel like they can get new guys. So we're forgetting about immediate dividends and we're thinking about the future dividends, which I really do like. I think this is the right thing to do. But here's my question. Given this, should Sidney Jones and Artie Burns be put on the trade block? Because Sidney Jones was good last year. PFF grade, like I said, above 70. And if you take out the first 2 games, it was probably over 75. He really gave you good stuff for a guy who was kind of a throwaway trade, a trade that people didn't really think much of. And he, by the end of the year, was playing phenomenal football on a team with a limited pass rush. And Artie Burns was really good the previous year as well for the Bears when he actually played. He didn't have a full season or anything, but he played very well. He is a good player. This is a former first-round pick. Sidney Jones, a former second-round pick. These guys have pedigree. So even though they're not playing right now, they have some trade value. Remember, we got a draft pick from Ahkello Witherspoon. Both of these guys probably have more pedigree than Ahkello Witherspoon did at the time we traded him. It wasn't a huge trade, but we got value. So given the fact that there's a youth movement at corner, given the fact that we have 2 guys who are coming along, showing flashes, showing positive things, would you trade Sidney Jones and Artie Burns because you know they're not going to be here next year because they're on the 1-year deals and you're not playing them anyway? Would you consider trading them for maybe Sidney? Maybe both these guys really could net you like 5th-round picks. Maybe one of them, I don't know who would be more valued. Maybe you get a 4th-round pick. What'd you get for Ahkello? It was like a 5th-rounder. Maybe you get a 4th-rounder out of one of these guys. They're both probably a little more valuable. So what do you think? The obvious downside would be your depth takes a hit, right? If Tariq Woolen or Michael Jackson get hurt, then you're putting out, maybe Ryan Neal gets involved. But, that's another young guy. Maybe you'd rather have him out there and see if he's any good instead of putting out some guy who is not part of your future, not part of your long-term plan. What about somebody like a practice squad promotion of a guy that we don't even really know that well? You've always got a couple of cornerbacks who are at least a tiny bit interesting when Carroll's involved. Maybe you just go pick up somebody off the street if somebody gets hurt. I mean, to a certain extent, you're accepting a lower level of immediate play when you're playing guys like Woolen and Jackson over Sidney and Artie. But do you do it? Or do you want the stability of quality depth? Do you want the stability of knowing that if things go really bad, you can just tap Sidney on the helmet and send him in, and not let Jackson's or Woolen's confidence get destroyed if things turn south. Because Woolen, in particular, is a guy who you want to become a stud for you in the coming weeks. I'm sorry, coming years, not so much this year. So you don't want his confidence to get blown up, but would you rather have a little bit of extra draft capital? Because a fourth round pick, if you could pull it, and I don't know if you could, it depends on what teams, what their situations are and how desperate they are for corner help. That would go a long way. That removes the motivation for you to trade down in the second round. If you have an extra fourth round pick, you're going to look at that and go, hey, I don't need to trade down in the second to pick up an extra fourth. I'm already good. I have 2 fourths. I have extra fourths. Artie Burns, a guy who looks like he may not play for us at all this year. If you could get a little bit of capital for him, I think I think I would do it. If the offer is there for even like a 5th rounder, I think you go with it. And if injuries happen, you're going to get Trey Brown back. Hopefully he can stay on the field. You've still got Kobe Bryant, who is by nature, I believe, an outside corner. And you've got John Reed, who is still kicking around on the roster. You can always toss him in there. You've got the ability to go get guys. Like this, what Pete Carroll had to say is this is kind of the mentality of a team that knows it's about the future, not the present. So if it really is, Sidney Jones and Artie Burns are here on this team for the present, but they're not really part of the future. I mean, they're not even playing in the present. How are they going to be here in the future? These guys are veterans. They are what they are. They're not going to, you're not grooming them to become starters next year. They already were groomed into starters. So I think I would do it. All right, I'll see you guys later. Let me know what you guys think about all this. I really like the idea of just putting Jackson and Woolen through the ringer right now and accept that the results are going to be flawed. And honestly, the results have not been atrocious. Michael Jackson and Tariq Woolen are far from the biggest problem on our defense. You look at what Darrell Taylor and Cody Barton are doing. You look at the defensive line. Those guys are all bigger weaknesses than Jackson and Woolen starting on the outside. They're going to have bad moments, but we're willing to live with that. And I'm not saying that Pete is embracing the tank, because I know he doesn't think like that. I'm sure in his mind he feels like these guys are playing fairly well, and they're playing okay. Like, it's not beyond the pale to say these guys are playing defensively well, but it is a mentality that speaks to an understanding that it's about the future, not the present. So, props. I like it. But how do we capitalize on it? Now that we know guys like Sidney and Artie are kind of expendable, unlikely to play very much this year, and are almost certainly not part of our future plans, can we squeeze out a little bit of value? That's the question. Because we won't know until we get there. We won't. But as of right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be buyers at the trade deadline. And if things go the way they went the last couple weeks, we will be sellers. Guys like Sidney Jones and Artie Burns are going to be near the top of the list for the trade market. And if those guys have the value that I think they may, based off their play in 2021, I make the play for it. There are a couple other guys I would also throw out there. Guys like maybe Poona Ford. If somebody out there feels like he could be a good fit in a 4-3 still because he's not fitting in here, sure. Honestly, if somebody wanted to give up a bunch for Rashad Penny, I might do that as well. But right now, the two guys who are clearly valuable, clearly have something left to give in a positive way on an NFL team that are just not getting the chance to play are Sidney Jones and Artie Burns. So let's make a decision. I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Go Hawks. I'll talk more about Woolen later, actually. But for now, I'll leave it at that. See you guys later.